My boyfriend demanded, "Stop talking to your therapist about our relationship. It's private." I was in therapy for depression after my best friend's suicide. I said, "I need professional help." He threatened to leave if I didn't quit. I said, "Then leave." My name is Elena Marlowe. I'm 27 years old, and before last March, I genuinely believed grief was something disciplined people survive by simply deciding to survive. That if you were mature enough, strong enough, emotionally intelligent enough, you would somehow carry loss neatly, quietly, gracefully. You would cry in acceptable doses, return phone calls, answer emails, show up to work looking mostly normal, and eventually become one of those people who said things like, "It was hard, but it made me stronger." Then my best friend died, and I learned that people say elegant things about grief, mostly because the real version makes everyone uncomfortable. The real version is uglier than people admit. It steals your appetite, turns ordinary places into emotional landmines, makes your body panic at unexpected triggers, and distorts time in strange, cruel ways. Some hours disappear. Some 5-minute stretches feel unlivable. And perhaps worst of all, it teaches you that the world keeps moving with an almost offensive normalcy, while yours has split cleanly in half. I won't use my best friend's name here. Some memories still feel too personal to hand over to strangers, even now. But he was not just my best friend. He was the boy who lived 3 houses down when we were kids. The person who saw every awkward version of me before adulthood taught me how to edit myself. He knew what I looked like with braces, bad bangs, emotional overreactions, and terrible coffee taste. He was there through college disasters, heartbreaks, career anxiety, and all the stupid confidence you only have in your early 20s. We were roommates freshman year because we specifically requested each other, convinced we'd be hilarious and efficient together. We were hilarious. We were not efficient. He once set off the dorm fire alarm, microwaving something I still cannot identify. I once cried over a statistics exam and accused academia of being emotionally abusive. We survived terrible cafeteria food, worse dating decisions, and the kind of late-night conversations that make you believe certain people will simply exist in your life forever. That's the thing nobody tells you. Forever is often just a story people tell themselves until reality interrupts. 3 weeks after his funeral, I started therapy because I was falling apart in ways I could no longer disguise. I grew up in a family where sadness was tolerated only if it remained tidy. You could be upset, sure. Just don't become inconvenient. Don't make other people uncomfortable. Don't be emotional too long. Don't stop functioning. Don't let pain interfere with usefulness. But I had stopped functioning. I wasn't sleeping. Food tasted like cardboard. I would sit at my desk at work staring at drainage plans I normally understood instantly, unable to process basic information. One afternoon, my supervisor asked if I was okay. I smiled automatically, said yes, then locked myself in a bathroom stall and shook so violently I had to bite the inside of my hand to stop myself from making noise. That was the day I found a therapist. And slowly, therapy began doing what survival mode had failed to do. It gave shape to chaos. Not solutions, not instant healing, just structure. A place where I didn't have to package my pain into something socially digestible. A place where I could say the ugliest thoughts out loud. The guilty ones, the irrational ones, the humiliating ones. The thoughts grief creates when it convinces you that if you had just texted sooner, called more often, noticed some invisible sign, maybe someone would still be alive. And yes, I talked about Ryan. Because therapy is not a confession booth with topic restrictions. Your relationships affect your mental health. That's reality. Ryan and I had been together for 2 years. And to be fair, when everything first happened, he was good to me. I need to say that because oversimplifying people is emotionally convenient, but rarely honest. He came to the funeral, held me when I couldn't breathe properly, brought me food I didn't eat, sat beside me in silence without demanding I become easier to be around. I will never pretend none of that mattered, but love sometimes changes once crisis stops looking temporary. That's something I learned the hard way. At first, the shifts were subtle. A sigh when I got quiet. A look when dinner conversation stalled. Comments that could almost be mistaken for concern if you wanted to be generous. "You seem down again." Still thinking about that? That. As if grief were an old topic I kept rudely revisiting. Then, "I feel like you're never fully here anymore." And maybe he was right. Part of me was still trapped in the morning his sister called. Still replaying her voice. Still irrationally waiting for reality to reverse itself. But Ryan didn't say it like he missed me. He said it like I was failing him. That difference matters. We ignore tone too often because words are easier to defend than intent. One night, driving home from dinner with his parents, he asked, "Do you talk about us in therapy?" "Sometimes." "What do you say?" "Normal relationship things. My therapist asks about relationships because they affect emotional well-being." He went quiet. Not relaxed quiet. Collected quiet. A week later, sitting in my apartment over dinner, he brought it up again. "I'm not comfortable with you talking about our relationship with some stranger." "He's my therapist. He's a man I've never met who knows private things about me. Everything is confidential." "That's not the point." Then came the real point. "Our relationship is between us." That sentence sounds reasonable until you examine it, because relationships do not exist in emotional isolation. If your relationship affects your mental health, it belongs in therapy. If your relationship affects your anxiety, boundaries, self-worth, or functioning, it belongs in therapy. Ryan didn't agree. "Talk about your grief," he said. "Talk about childhood. Fine, leave me out of it." I remember looking at him and feeling something inside me go cold, because that request wasn't about privacy. It was about narrative control. "If I censor therapy," I said, "it stops being therapy." "Then maybe you don't need it anymore." That sentence should have sounded cruel immediately. Instead, I sat there trying to interpret it generously. That's another dangerous habit. Trying to make hurtful things sound less hurtful because accepting them at face value would require action. Then came the ultimatum. "If you keep talking about me in therapy, I'm done." And I saw him clearly. Not the man who comforted me after the funeral. Not the boyfriend I loved. Just a person asking me to prioritize his comfort over my recovery. So I said, "Then leave." He did. And somehow the quiet way he closed the door hurt more than if he had slammed it. Because calm cruelty always feels more deliberate. For one awful second afterward, I almost called my best friend. I still did that sometimes. Reached instinctively for someone whose number still existed but whose voice no longer did. Instead, I called his sister. She listened, then told me about a grief support group. And before we hung up, she said, "Please don't stop therapy." That sentence stayed with me. Because sometimes the people who understand pain most clearly are the ones who survived similar versions of it. Ryan came back 4 days later like nothing had happened. Still had his key. Walked into my apartment while I was making lunch. Sat down like we were simply resuming a paused conversation. "I've been doing research." I already hated the sentence before he finished it. He started talking about therapy dependency. How maybe my therapist benefited financially from keeping me emotionally fragile. How maybe I had become manipulated. And what struck me most wasn't even the accusation. It was the certainty. People often become most confident when protecting beliefs they cannot emotionally afford to question. Then he said something that changed everything. "You question things now." I remember just staring at him. Because there it was. The real grievance. Not therapy. Not privacy. Not concern. My changing. My boundaries. My refusal to remain emotionally compliant. Healing changes relationship dynamics. Not because healing is selfish. Because unhealthy dynamics often depend on one person staying smaller. And once that person grows, the structure destabilizes. Ryan saw something shift in my face and changed tactics immediately. His tone softened. "Elena," he said quietly, "I'm scared." That almost worked. Fear is harder to reject than anger because it makes cruelty look vulnerable. "I feel like I'm losing you." For a moment, I almost comforted him. The old version of me would have, but something about hearing him frame my healing as abandonment made me stop. "I was barely surviving," I said. "That's dramatic." "No," I answered. "That's accurate." Then came tears. Real or strategic, I still don't know. Maybe both. Human emotion is rarely clean enough to separate neatly. Eventually, he said, "Fine, do whatever you want." For about 10 days, life looked normal. Dinner, television, routine. But it felt like living inside a house with structural damage. Still standing, but one hard movement away from collapse. Then I walked into therapy, and my therapist said, "Someone contacted the office asking about your treatment." Everything inside me went cold. My therapist chose his words carefully. "A caller claimed to be a concerned family member asking about your treatment." I stared at him. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't process what he had said. Not because the words were unclear, because my mind rejected the possibility before it fully formed. "We did not confirm anything," he said calmly. "But if someone in your life is attempting to access your treatment information, that's something worth taking seriously." I already knew. He never said Ryan's name. He didn't have to. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking. It wasn't heartbreak this time. It was violation. And that felt entirely different. Because therapy was the one place in my life where I had stopped performing. And Ryan had tried to enter it. I called him immediately. "Did you call my therapist?" Silence. Then, "What?" "Ryan." Another pause. Then a sigh. "I was worried." By trying to access my private medical information? We're in a relationship. That doesn't give you access to my healthcare. You weren't telling me what was going on. Because therapy is private. You're choosing him over me. No, I said, I'm choosing myself. His tone changed, sharpened. I was there when you fell apart, and I appreciated that. Then how am I suddenly the bad guy? Because that's how people do it sometimes. They remind you of every good thing they ever did, as though kindness creates permanent immunity from accountability. Then he said, "You sound like you're in some cult." And something inside me went completely still. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was clear. We're done. What? We're done. Elena. No. I hung up. Then I called my best friend's sister. I'm ready for the grief group, I said. She simply replied, Tuesday, 7 o'clock. The silence didn't last. Ryan's brother called first, accusatory from the beginning. My brother's been crying every day. I sat there for a second, almost stunned by how quickly pain becomes evidence when it belongs to the other side. I'm sorry he's hurting, I said. That doesn't make what he did acceptable. That therapist poisoned you. No, I said calmly. Ryan chose his own behavior. He hung up angry. The next call came from Ryan's mother. Her voice was softer. That almost made it harder. He was concerned, Elena. Concern doesn't justify violating my privacy. Relationships require compromise. Compromise is deciding where to spend Christmas, I said, not negotiating access to my health care. Silence. Then, you've changed. I looked out the window and answered honestly. Yes. A pause. Then I added, that's what healing is supposed to do. A few nights later, I went back to the grief group. Same folding chairs. Same terrible coffee. Same fluorescent lighting that somehow made everyone look both exhausted and oddly trustworthy. There's something intimate about rooms where nobody is pretending. Most adult spaces reward emotional editing. Work, social gatherings, family dinners, everyone performing functional versions of themselves. I'm good. Busy. Fine. Meanwhile, entire internal disasters remain invisible. But not in that room. Nobody there needed polished coping. Nobody required emotional neatness. That was strangely sacred. The group leader looked at me halfway through the evening. You've been quiet these past couple weeks, she said gently. Would you like to share? Every part of me wanted to say no. Not because I had nothing to say, because saying it out loud would make it real in a different way. Pain inside your own mind remains strangely controllable. Shared pain becomes witnessed. And witnessed pain cannot be rehidden quite the same way. Then I thought about him. Not his death. Him. And I realized something that genuinely broke my heart. I had spent months talking about the tragedy, the depression, the aftermath, the guilt, but not him, the actual living person. Death does that. It flattens people into events if you let it. I hated that. So I nodded and began. At first, I said, I thought the hardest part would be accepting he was gone. I paused. But honestly, the hardest part is how normal the world insists on becoming. That room understood immediately. No explanation needed. I told them about stupid college road trips, terrible memes, how he made fun of my coffee choices, how we once argued for an hour about whether caramel counted as ruining coffee integrity. People laughed. Real laughter. And God, I hadn't realized how much I missed hearing stories about him that weren't centered around loss. Then I told them about the last text. Ramen. Just ramen. A completely ordinary message about trying a new restaurant. No dramatic farewell. No meaningful final conversation. No emotional closure. That's one of the cruelest truths about sudden loss. Life rarely respects narrative timing. The older man across from me shook his head when I called it ridiculous. No, he said quietly, it isn't. And I knew instantly he had his own version. Everyone in that room did. Some ordinary last sentence that now carried unbearable emotional weight. A canceled plan. A missed voicemail. A stupid joke. Grief turns mundane details into sacred artifacts. I cried. Not the frozen kind of crying. Not shut down crying. Actual release. And no one rushed to fix it. That mattered more than I can explain. People are often so uncomfortable with pain they rush to silence it with cliches. Stay strong. Everything happens for a reason. He'd want you happy. But real comfort is often quieter. Someone beside me touched my arm. That was it. No speeches. No emotional instruction manual. Just presence. Sometimes that's enough. Driving home afterward, something felt different. Not magically better. Just lighter. As if some emotional muscle I'd been clenching for months had finally released. That night, I laughed at a text from his sister. A real laugh. And for the first time in months, it didn't feel stolen. Healing is strange like that. It doesn't usually arrive dramatically. It arrives in small, ordinary returns. Appetite, laughter, focus, future planning. The next morning, my supervisor pulled me aside. And for the first time in a long time, my life started moving forward in a way that felt intentional, not forced. When I walked into my supervisor's office, I braced for bad news. That's what happens when you've been emotionally underwater for long enough. Neutral things start sounding threatening. A simple "got a minute" feels like judgment. A slightly serious expression feels like catastrophe. When your inner world has been unstable, your nervous system becomes embarrassingly creative. I sat down preparing for concern. Instead, he smiled. "You seem better." I blinked. "Better?" "More present," he said. "Sharper. Less like half of you is somewhere else." That landed harder than I expected, because suffering always feels more invisible from the inside. When you're the one living it, you assume everyone sees the polished version, the functioning version, the version that still answers emails and shows up on time. But pain leaks into posture, into delayed responses, into distracted eye contact, into how often you stare at a screen without processing a word. "You've been doing strong work lately," he said. "There's a larger project opening up next quarter. Bigger client, more responsibility. Interested?" A few months earlier, I would have panicked. Not because I wasn't capable, because grief narrows your imagination. When survival becomes your full-time internal job, ambition feels like something that belongs to other people. But that morning, I heard myself say yes before fear could organize an argument. And the strange thing was, I meant it. That shook me more than the offer itself. Because healing often becomes visible in practical ways before emotional ones. People expect breakthroughs to feel cinematic, powerful speeches, sudden clarity, transformational moments. Sometimes healing looks far less glamorous. It looks like answering texts, buying groceries, doing laundry before it becomes humiliating. Planning something for next week because somewhere deep down, you quietly expect yourself to still be here. That afternoon, I stood in a grocery store staring at vegetables longer than any emotionally stable person should. And suddenly I understood why I felt emotional over something so ordinary. Because depression doesn't always look like dramatic collapse. Sometimes it looks like indifference toward your own future. And standing there, choosing actual food, felt like evidence that some hidden part of me had decided I deserved continuity. That realization nearly made me cry in produce. Recovery is weird. Ryan never contacted me again, and the silence was harder than I expected. Not because I wanted him back, but because unanswered endings tempt you to invent explanations. Sometimes silence is the ending, and you still have to heal anyway. A mutual friend picked up Ryan's remaining things: a hoodie, a charger, a watch, tiny objects that somehow carried disproportionate emotional weight. Relationships always reduce strangely at the end. You build years of intimacy, then eventually it becomes someone's toothbrush, a forgotten sweatshirt, a coffee preference you didn't mean to memorize. It's unsettling how much emotional history can fit inside ordinary objects. I changed my locks, not because I thought Ryan would come back. Because emotional safety sometimes requires physical rituals, something concrete, something that tells your nervous system what your rational brain already knows. You're safe. People underestimate how physical emotional recovery actually is. Your mind can understand something long before your body believes it. I kept going to therapy. Every Thursday. Same office, same chair, same opening question. "How was your week?" And slowly I noticed something important. The grief wasn't disappearing, but it was changing shape. That distinction matters. People talk about healing like pain should vanish, as if success means emotional amnesia. That's nonsense. Loss like that doesn't politely evaporate. It becomes more livable, less drowning, more waves. Still painful some days, still sharp in unexpected moments, but survivable. That's a different thing entirely. I kept going to the grief group too, and eventually those awful folding chairs started feeling sacred. Not because the room was special, because honesty lived there. Real honesty. No performance. No emotional makeup. No pretending your internal life matched your polite facial expression. And one night after group, sitting alone in my car, I thought about Ryan with surprising clarity. Not longing, not rage, just clarity, which almost felt anticlimactic. I had expected healing to feel victorious, empowering, dramatic. Instead, it felt quieter, like finally seeing something in daylight that had only existed in confusing shadows. Ryan loved me, I believe that, but love alone does not make behavior healthy, and understanding someone's fear does not obligate you to tolerate what that fear makes them do. Realizing that was painful, but freeing. It taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Empathy does not require self-sacrifice. Compassion and access are not the same thing. That realization changed how I understood relationships entirely. Near the end of one therapy session, my therapist asked, Do you miss Ryan? I thought about it longer than I expected, then answered honestly, no. He nodded. What do you miss? That question hit harder, because suddenly I understood. I miss who I thought he was. And honestly, that hurt more than missing the actual relationship, because grieving reality is one kind of pain. Grieving your own mistaken perception is another. You have to sit with the fact that the future you imagined was built around an incomplete understanding. That's humiliating in a very private way. But maturity, I've learned, is not avoiding painful truths. It's surviving them without inventing prettier lies. That night, I texted my best friend's sister, I think I'm okay. She replied, actually okay or pretending okay? I laughed, then answered, actually okay. A few seconds later, she replied, he'd be proud of you. That still made me cry. Even then, because grief doesn't vanish just because healing exists. Joy and sadness can coexist. That's something adulthood teaches brutally. People act like emotions should replace each other neatly, as if happiness means grief ended, as if progress means no more pain. That isn't how human beings work. You can heal and still ache. You can laugh and still miss someone. You can move forward without leaving love behind. And sometimes I still think about Ryan's ultimatum, him or therapy. At the time, it felt devastating. Now it feels revealing. Because what he was really asking was much simpler. Stay the version of yourself that makes me comfortable, or become someone I can't control. And back then, choosing myself felt terrifying. Now, it feels obvious. Not because I became fearless, because I became honest about what love should never require, about what healing actually costs, about how some relationships function beautifully only while one person remains emotionally smaller. And once that person grows, the relationship doesn't suddenly become unhealthy. It simply reveals that it already was. My best friend is still gone. That truth will never become beautiful. But I'm still here. And for a long time, that alone felt uncertain. Now it feels intentional. I still go to therapy, still attend grief group, still have bad days, still miss him in strange moments. A joke he would have liked, a place we meant to go, a song I forgot existed until it ambushed me in public. But missing someone no longer feels like drowning. It feels like carrying. And maybe that's what healing really is, not becoming who you were before loss. That person is gone too. Healing is becoming someone new who knows how to carry what happened without letting it define every room she walks into. And if someone ever asks you to stay broken so the relationship feels easier for them, that is not love. That is dependency wearing love's clothing. I think my best friend would have made some terrible joke about my therapist, then told me to keep going anyway.